It's finally that time of the beta cycle where we can talk about the banners, in which of course Vesna and Vodyanitsa are going to be running as their debut patch, and the reruns are going to be Skirk and Escoffier. It feels like they reran yesterday, but it's actually been a decently long time since we've last seen them. I thought we were getting the Linnea and Zebai rerun this patch, but Linnea came out after the last Skirk and Escoffier rerun, so no, this actually tracks. Lunar Crystallize is most likely going to be next patch. Anyways, you know the deal, we're just going to be talking about how valuable all of these characters are, and for the rerun units, we'll discuss if anything has changed since their last rerun, with any sort of meta shakeups, and then we're going to close out the video by discussing the vertical investment of these characters, and whether or not you should go for their constellations and signature weapons, and since these characters do play in the same team archetypes, which constellations of said teammates should you prioritize first. But before we do that, as always, if at any point during the video you are entertained or informed, make sure to drop a like and even consider subscribing, as I talk on various topics regarding Genshin's meta, and I'll try to keep you updated. Shout out to all my lovely channel members, I really appreciate your support, it means the world to me. Hugs and kisses to you all. 1,000 more buffs to Vodyanitsa by the end of this beta cycle, and also, so Nefa and Flynn's are going to be having their reruns very soon, so if you would like to cut down on the costs while going for them, then I would like to announce the sponsor for today's video, Moan.gg. Moan is a very safe and reliable top-up site that allows you to get Primo Gems at a great deal of up to 40% off. New users will be able to get a Welkin Moon for just $3 instead of $5, while the $100 Primo Gem pack is reduced all the way down to $70, which is a huge steal. And don't worry, your data will be kept safe whether you use either of the two main top-up methods. You have login top-ups where you can submit your account information, and the Moon team will safely guide you into getting your gems, as you can see me doing here. And when I log back in, my Welkin has been refreshed, with the added benefit of the gems being even cheaper this way. Or you could do self top-ups where you log into the game through Moan and complete your purchase that way. So what are you waiting for? Head over to Moan.gg using my link in the description below. Thank you to Moan for sponsoring this video, and now back to it. Now, let's start with Vesna. With Vesna, she's essentially Mizuki Premium. If you want a more detailed breakdown of her kit, go watch my very first video on her about 2 weeks ago, and you can also watch my video yesterday for a summary of the changes that she received. But to summarize her kit, she is going to be an on-field Stellar Swirl Honor Mode DPS, with her playstyle being based around unleashing her strong Stellar Swirl elemental skills. Her gameplay is extremely similar to that of a C1 Zebai, with her damage being a lot more backloaded. Now in regards to her value, Vesna's strength is undeniable. She's shaping up to be one of the best carries in the game, in her premium teams, especially after her buffs, where she's relative to the likes of Zebai, and with a C6 Traveler we should be able to get in a few patches. Assuming nothing stronger comes out before then, she also has top 1 DPS potential in the game, and even without some of her premium limited supports, like losing a Vodyanitsa or losing an Odette, she should still be about as good as Sandrone is without Odette, sitting around the 130k to 140k DPS range, which is basically on par with most teams pre 7.0. So regardless of your account situation, you should be able to make a strong team for Vesna. And if you like Vesna and want to pull for her, there's really no qualms in doing so. This is a very strong character, you will not be disappointed. But now regardless of her strength, we can discuss her value a little bit, in which despite how strong she is, for a lot of accounts, you may not technically really need to seek out Vesna. In my opinion, I don't think a lot of people are giving Hoyoverse enough credit to where both of the stellar reactions are very easily accessible, with both having a plethora of units that are good in both reactions, and they kind of just made Mizuki too strong. There is a noticeable gap between Vesna and Mizuki, especially after the buffs, and with her being a hyper carry, you can of course have much better vertical investment into her teams. But if you just care about bypassing Stellar Swirl Shill, you can just use your Mizuki for that and get your clear, especially if you don't care about pushing Dire. There are some caveats to this though. Hoyoverse is of course promoting the need for you to have both Stellar Swirl and Stellar Conduct, since they're making the reactions so accessible, and we are already getting double Stellar bosses in the next Stygian lineup. So ideally you want to have 2 premium stellar teams, in which one of these teams is going to have Odette, and then the other of these teams is going to have a stellar DPS that can enable the reaction, like Sandrone or like Vesna. So if you're in a situation where you need your Odette to make your Sino good, then it might actually be worthwhile for you to pull for Vesna and have a second good stellar team than having one really good stellar team and one kind of not good stellar team, because Mizuki teams without Odette suffer more than Vesna teams without Odette, obviously. So even if you are someone who does have a C1 or a C2 Mizuki, there may still be cases where Vesna is still going to be a good and worthwhile pull for you. So it's honestly not as black and white as I've made it out to be in the past. Mizuki being good doesn't erase the fact that you want 2 good stellar teams. So unless you already are someone who has Sandrone, there is still some incentive for you to want to have Vesna. Anyways, that's enough about her. Let's talk about Vodyanitsa now. And since the version 3 BBL she received, she went from being like a complete brick of a pull to someone a lot of you may consider actually getting. And while she isn't a must pull per se, in both of her respective team archetypes, you won't be disappointed by having her. For those of you who need a quick refresher on what Vodyanitsa does, don't worry, it's very simple. She's a single target healer with her elemental skill, and her elemental skill will also shred cryo and hydra resistances, and on top of this her passive provides hydra and cryo teammates quills, or if she's being played in a stellar swirl team, then her passive provides the team with stellar swirl quills, on top of giving an Anima resistant shred, and adding onto her sustain aspect, she does also provide resistance to interruption, so your on-field character will get staggered less when playing her. Vodyanitsa is very simply set up to be both a good unit in stellar swirl teams, as well as being a free support, and while she technically isn't the most synergistic in either team archetype, her buffs are strong enough to warrant a place in these teams. Starting with Vesna, her typical team core is built up with double cryo for cryo resonance and just because the cryo supports are so good, and then from there you would normally put in a second Onamo unit, like Farazan, who provides very strong buffing to the team, and contributes to doing more stellar swirls. Now here we're going to reach what we call the Vodyanitsa paradox. Vesna is a character that has very good teams, and those teams don't necessarily require you to have Vodyanitsa, but Vesna is a character that can get interrupted while using her special skill, which is so much of her damage, and also from what testers have said, her survivability without something like a healer is kind of bad, in which case even if you were to supplement Vodyanitsa with someone like Chi-Chi, Vodyanitsa is by far the best mix of sustain while having strong buffs, to where Vodyanitsa as a sustain is stronger than some of the sustainless teams for Vesna, and much better than someone like Chi-Chi, and you're also able to use her in place of the Cryo MC, and running solo Cryo teams and they're still viable. So she will, in my opinion, just make the best Vesna team. And I think it's up to you to decide whether or not you want to gamble with playing Vesna sustainless, or you just want to supplement her with Chi-Chi, and if that increase in comfort and damage is going to be worth it for you. Keep in mind that Vesna and Vodyanitsa are going to be in the same patch, and there's a chance they're in the same half. Vesna is obviously the more important pull to stellar swirl teams, as Vodyanitsa does nothing for a character like Mizuki, so you're always going to want to prioritize Vesna for that. And then if you're using someone like Diona or Chi-Chi, getting Vesna's signature weapon or her constellations are a similar increase to getting Vodyanitsa, and maybe more impactful long term. So while Vodyanitsa is the premier option to Vesna teams, she's not necessarily mandatory for Vesna to be a good character, she's just the best support for a balance of quality of life and damage. Now for freeze teams and more specifically Skirk teams, Vodyanitsa is a very meaningful upgrade to Skirk teams over her other 4th slot options, and she's even strong enough to completely supplement Escoffier if you need Effie on another team, and Vodyanitsa is also as impactful as getting other forms of Skirk's vertical investment, like your signature weapon or her constellations, or any of the other support's constellation ones. So if you feel the need to upgrade your Skirk team, I cannot recommend Vodyanitsa enough, and I would argue she's more valuable to freeze teams than she is to Vesna teams, or at the very least it makes more sense for someone who plays Skirk to go for Vodyanitsa over someone who wants to play Vesna to go for Vodyanitsa. The only thing going against her in freeze teams is whether or not you really need the upgrade at all. Unlike Arlecchino, Skirk isn't getting a stronger freeze boss, it's the same one we've had since her release. Skirk has been able to clear her boss very comfortably since her own release, even with very low cost, so unless you just want to make your Skirk stronger into neutral matchups, teams, there technically isn't that heavy of an incentive to get Vodyanitsa, considering the fact that most people already have a complete Skirk team, and a lot of people are probably already happy with the performance of their Skirk team. So she's strong for freeze and Skirk teams, but once again, not a mandatory pull. Outside of those two team archetypes, you can technically play Vodyanitsa in a lot of different teams. I'm going to look in and calculate how good she is for Chaska, but that should be a good team. And also to any Varka mains who want to complete all 4 elements where Varka can be good in, Vodyanitsa is the best for Hydro Varka teams. It's just that Hydro Varka teams are weaker than Varka's best teams, so there once again isn't necessarily an incentive to go out of your way to get Vodyanitsa for that. But yeah, Vodyanitsa doesn't really have that many restrictions. She'll be able to work with all Cryo and Hydro characters. It's just that a lot of those teams are kind of dead, and from a meta lens, there's no real reason to pull her for that. So yes, Vodyanitsa, she's a good character, but in terms of being an efficient pull to make, while I think most accounts can benefit from her, I don't really think any account is screaming to need her. Now, let's talk about Skirk. Nothing has changed that much about her besides Vodyanitsa, and I've already established how much she raises Skirk's base power level. Now, Skirk is a good character. She's still one of the better DPSs you can choose to invest into, but to anyone wanting to pull for her right now, to make this clear, I would only consider pulling for her if you do have a Fiorina and an Escoffier already, or are planning to get those things in this patch. If you are starting from complete ground zero and don't have Fiorina or Escoffier or a good fort slot, I would just skip Skirk entirely. But for people that do have something to work with, it's up to you to look at your account and your DPSs, and if Skirk fulfills a niche you don't currently have, or if let's say you're going from Ayaka to Skirk, if you think the power increase you're getting from Skirk is going to be justified. If you feel like you need more teams that can brute force neutral content well, then getting Skirk won't be a bad choice for you. If you feel like your other teams can't check freeze content as well, Skirk will also be a good pull for you. But if the freeze content in the game can already be handled decently by your account, and you already have multiple strong neutral teams, then adding Skirk to your roster won't really do anything for you. And looking at Skirk's boss, at least in Stygian, there are some other double cryo teams that are able to check this boss decently well, and since Skirk is rerunning with this boss and it isn't getting stronger than it was before, or there isn't a new freeze boss to replace it, it's very likely this is the strongest freeze boss we may be getting in Stygian. So if you feel like you can already comfortably check this boss, then even less so of a reason to pull for Skirk. Another thing people may struggle with is Skirk's combos. For Skirk to reach her maximum potential, you do want to go beyond the basic N5 spam combos that people were doing on her release. Skirk combos have evolved much past that. At first, people were recommending walk cancels with her, which I'm pretty sure is still her technical ceiling, and a lot of people were turned off by those combos. But now with Skirk, she has her N2 spam combos, which are much easier to do than implementing walk cancels, and can get you very close to her theoretical green ceiling, to the point where you don't have to do walk cancels with Skirk to get like 90% of her value, and that made me enjoy playing Skirk a lot more, as these are combos I can do. TLDR, Skirk is still one of the best characters into neutral matchups, and has amazing brute force potential, assuming you can do her better combos, as almost every early constellation or weapon you can get ends up being a pretty big increase to the team, and she's still by far the best check we have into any freeze related content. The only reason to not pull for Skirk is if you think you can handle that freeze content fine without her, in which we have gotten more cryo teams that are able to do that, or if you're just starting from complete ground zero with Skirk and have none of her teammates, in which case I don't think it's worth putting all those pulls towards getting a team for her right now. Now let's round things up by talking about Escoffier. Escoffier is just a cryo sub DPS that does constant cryo turret damage, on top of having a Hydro and Cryo res shred that scales with the amount of Hydro and Cryo characters you have, with extremely strong scaling with 4 Cryo or Hydro characters on your team. This has left Escoffier in a position where she's essentially the premier freeze support for Skirk, and all freeze teams in general. And since her last rerun, the only 2 real shakeups she has really had have been recently, from the entire stellar meta that revolves around Cryo and Vodyanitsa. I have already explained how Vodyanitsa increases the base power level of freeze teams. Escoffier is on freeze teams, so if you're planning on pulling for Vodyanitsa, having Escoffier is also a good addition to your account in that case. And technically in a way that kind of lowers Escoffier's value, Vodyanitsa is strong enough to replace Fiorina, and she's also strong enough to replace Escoffier. So whilst obviously if you're building up a freeze team you would prioritize Escoffier, if you have other reasons to want to pull for Vodyanitsa, or you just like Vodyanitsa more, you don't really lose out a ton by skipping Escoffier there, but ultimately you would want to pull for Effie for freeze teams. Another thing that's happened that has shaken up Escoffier's place in the meta is going to be the fact that she's really good into the Stellar meta so far. Escoffier is currently, theoretically at least, the best support for Stellar DPSs like Sandrane and Risley. Stellar Conduct is a team archetype that really likes having strong cryo application, and Effie is one of our better cryo applicators, on top of her other benefits like the cryo reshred she gets, which is something Stellar teams do lack, on top of her strong personal damage. The only thing is that unlike Freeze, I don't think you can justify pulling Escoffier just to play her in Stellar teams. She gets so much competition from the other buffed cryo supports, like Chi-Chi and like Diona, who are more than good enough and comparable to her, with Chi-Chi at C6 even being better. But on top of that, I do feel like the Stellar teams with Effie aren't really that much better to begin with in actual practice. When playing Effie in a Sandrane team, for example, you are kind of playing sustainless to get the best performance out of her, unlike just using someone like Diana or Chi-Chi, as Escoffier's healing is conditional on using her burst, which you optimally don't want to do for damage unless you have her signature weapon, where healing is just a part of Diana and Chi-Chi's natural gameplay loop. So the theoretical benefits you could get from Escoffier don't really exist in practical gameplay unless you're avoiding all damage, to where the relative clear time you'll get from using Chi-Chi or Escoffier will pretty much be the same. We have the Cryo Orcon around the corner as well, who is most likely going to do something for Stellar teams and be an upgrade or improvement. There are also two more characters with Stellar linchpins, which once again, they're most likely going to do something for Stellar Conduct. So there's no reason you should be pulling Escoffier for Stellar Conduct or anything that isn't Freeze related. Pulling Escoffier for Freeze should be the main focus, and if she happens to be able to be used in some of your other teams, like in double cryo setups or in some Stellar teams, that is just an additional benefit and not the main reason you should pull for her. TLDR, if you do not have Escoffier right now, the only main reason you'd be pulling for her is to complete your Freeze team, or you think a good generalist cryo sub DPS would do something for your account, which honestly fair enough considering most cryo characters don't do anything. So yeah, now usually I would give a value ranking based on who I think is the most to least valuable character in this phase, but like genuinely, I have nothing. The value of these characters changes so much more depending on what you have. Vesna's value drops if you have a C2 Mizuki, but even then it still may be worthwhile to pull for her. Investing in Freeze teams as a whole may not even be the best move now, but for others who don't have 3 strong teams built, investing into a Freeze team might be the play, in which Skirk and Effie's value shoots up. And then Vodyanitsa is dependent on you having Vesna or Skirk, primarily, and they are all in the same version. So I feel like I can't really give a clear ranking on that. This is the most it depends banner I think we've had for units. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed my explanations. Let's just discuss the vertical investments of these characters and whether or not it's better to invest into their constellations or their weapon. I'm just gonna lump Skirk and Escoffier here together, as it's pretty simple to do them both at the same time. Here's an infographic covering the vertical investment for Skirk and Effie, in which using Finale of the Deep as the baseline, the biggest thing you can do for Skirk is get her signature weapon, with Escoffier's C1 being very close behind. Because Effie's C1 is so conditional, to the point where you're only using it if you're playing Skirk teams anyways, in my opinion, the best course of action for vertically investing into a Skirk team would be getting Skirk's weapon first, and then if you have the ability to make one more pull, I would go for Vodyanitsa, or honestly maybe even Effie C1, and then from there I would just get Skirk's constellations. And for Effie, if you're looking to vertical on her, you should always prioritize getting her C1 first. Her weapon is really good and can be used on other characters, but in a lot of cases I found that trying to use her weapon can often add in issues to a team, since the buff is based on healing, to the point where pulling her weapon even for other characters is never really the most optimal pull you can make, and therefore I don't think it's worth it over other things. Also, Favonius is just a very good weapon on Escoffier in general, since her team is so energy hungry. For Vesna, this is also a case where you want to prioritize her weapon first. Her weapon gives such an insane amount of stats, and then on top of that, also gives energy, allowing Vesna to have to build less energy, and comfortably use her burst every rotation. And while her constellation are good, I would only go for them after getting her weapon first. And to close things out with Vodyanitsa, Thrilling Tales is so good at her weapon, and her constellations are just better than getting her weapon, to the point where I just don't really think you need to consider getting her weapon, and instead just focus on her constellations if you want to vertically invest into her. And Vodyanitsa's constellations are actually somewhat comparable team DPS increases to getting the constellations on Skirk and Vesna. So if you play both, or just want something that's potentially more flexible, there isn't that much of a harm in going for this as well, even over DPS constellations. But with that, I think I have said everything I needed to. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment who you're pulling for in 7.1, as I would love to hear it and I respond to almost every single comment. Channel members, thank you so much for your continued support. It means the world to me. I love you all. Thank you to everyone else for watching the video, and I'll see you guys on the flip side. Peace.